On the morning of August 30th, 2013, a Toyota Highlander was found on its side near Castaic Lake in Los Angeles County, California. The SUV had gone off-road near the lake's main ramp area. Inside were personal belongings, a phone, a wallet, a laptop, the kind of things most people don't leave behind if they're calmly walking away from their life. But the driver wasn't there. His name was Bryce Laspisa. He was 19 years old, a college student, and he'd been driving south through California toward his parents' home in Orange County. That drive should have been long but simple. Instead, it turned into one of the strangest missing person timelines in modern California history. Because Bryce wasn't missing for days before anyone realized something was wrong, he wasn't unreachable for most of the story. He wasn't in some unknown place with no contact and no trail. For much of the time before he vanished, people were still talking to him. His parents were calling him. Roadside assistance had contact with him. Authorities would later become involved. And more than once, it seemed like Bryce was finally about to keep driving home. But he didn't. Hour after hour, he stayed on the road, or close to it, moving through a trip that should have already been over. Then before sunrise, his vehicle was found near Castaic Lake, and Bryce Laspisa was gone. The route itself wasn't complicated. That may actually be one of the most unsettling parts. Bryce wasn't trying to navigate some confusing back road route through the middle of nowhere. He was on I-5. The drive south was almost brutally simple. Stay on the freeway, keep going, get through the Grapevine, past Castaic, continue toward Orange County, but somewhere along that simple line, Bryce's behavior stopped matching the route. Bryce David Laspisa was 19 years old when he disappeared. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Bryce was last seen on August 30th, 2013 in Castaic, California. He had red hair, blue eyes, and a tattoo on his left shoulder of a Taurus bullhead with Roman numerals. At the time, he was connected to Sierra College in Northern California, and his family lived in Southern California. Reports describe him as a young man who had been attending school and who was driving home to visit his parents in Laguna Niguel. That detail matters because this case doesn't begin with a stranger in an unknown city. It begins with a son trying to get home. And for his parents, Karen and Michael, the situation unfolded in the most agonizing way possible. There was no immediate silence. There wasn't one sudden moment where Bryce vanished from the map and no one knew where to start looking. Instead, there were phone calls, there were updates, there were repeated moments where it seemed like Bryce was coming home, even if something about the situation felt wrong. And that's the part of what makes this disappearance so difficult to sit with. Because when someone disappears without warning, the horror is immediate. But when someone is still answering, still talking, still saying they're coming, the fear builds differently. It builds one conversation at a time. And before the road ever ended near Castaic Lake, there were already signs that something about Bryce's life had shifted. Before Bryce disappeared, people close to him reportedly became concerned about his behavior. This is one of the most sensitive parts of the case, because it's easy to look backward and assign meaning to every action. Once we know someone vanished, every strange moment starts to feel like a clue. Every unusual decision starts to feel like a warning sign, but we have to be careful. Concern is not a diagnosis. Strange behavior is not proof of intent, and a person acting unusually doesn't automatically tell us what happened later. What can be said is that reports around the case describe Bryce acting differently in the period leading up to the disappearance. There were accounts that he had broken up with his girlfriend, there were concerns from people around him, and there were reports that he had been giving away some possessions. Those details matter, but they need to be handled honestly, because hindsight can be dangerous in missing persons cases. It can make a messy human situation look more obvious than it actually was at the time. In real life, people do confusing things all the time without disappearing. They have bad weeks, they make impulsive choices, they pull away, they worry the people around them. So the point isn't to say we know what Bryce was thinking. We don't. The point is that before the drive south, people around Bryce had already noticed something was off, and then he got behind the wheel. Bryce was traveling through California heading toward his parents' home in Orange County. That trip would have taken several hours, but it wasn't supposed to stretch into a long, confusing time of stops, delays, phone calls, and uncertainty. At some point during the trip, Bryce ended up in the Buttonwillow area of Kern County. Buttonwillow sits along Interstate 5, a major north-south route through California. It's the kind of place where drivers stop for gas, food, and a break before getting back on the highway. For someone driving from Northern California towards Southern California, it makes sense as part of the route. But what happened there didn't feel like an ordinary stop. Reports say Bryce ran out of gas and received roadside assistance. Gas was brought to him, and by itself, that wouldn't be unusual. People run out of gas. People misjudge distance. People get tired on long drives and make mistakes. But after getting help, Bryce reportedly didn't simply get back on the road and continue home. He stayed. And that delay became one of the defining pieces of the case. His parents were waiting for him. They expected him to keep heading south, but the hours dragged on. And the longer he remained in that area, the harder it became to explain the trip as a normal drive that had just gone a little sideways. At one point, roadside assistance was reportedly asked to check on him again. Bryce was still in the area. He was alive. He was reachable. And from the outside, there was still a chance for the situation to resolve. He could still drive home. He could still call and say he was on the way. He could still pull into his parents' driveway and turn this entire thing into a frightening family story that ended with relief. But that's not what happened. Instead, the delay continued, and the Buttonwillow part of the timeline became the section people will struggle to understand. The Buttonwillow portion of this timeline is the part that makes people pause. Because if Bryce was trying to get home, why did he remain there for so long? That question has followed this case for years. Some people look at it and see someone in crisis. Some see exhaustion, some see hesitation, some wonder if he was trying to avoid going home. Others wonder if there was something else happening that's never been publicly confirmed. But the facts are limited. We know Bryce was in the Buttonwillow area. We know he had contact with people during the trip. We know he eventually continued south. But we don't know exactly what was going through his mind during those hours. And that uncertainty matters. Because the temptation is to force the timeline into a clean story, a beginning, a motive, and a final choice that explains everything. But real disappearances are often not clean. Sometimes the facts only show movement, a car here, a phone call there, a witness who saw someone alive, a family waiting at home. And between those points are gaps. Bryce's case is built out of those gaps. The strange part isn't that he vanished without anyone knowing where he had been. The strange part is that people had an idea of where he was, and still nobody could stop whatever was coming next. As concern grew, that tension moved from family phone calls into something more official. As concern grew, authorities became part of the timeline. Reports indicate that law enforcement had contact with Bryce before the vehicle was found near Castaic Lake. This is another part of the case that can easily be misunderstood, because people naturally wonder why someone didn't just make him go home. But that's not always how these situations work. A welfare check or contact with law enforcement doesn't automatically mean someone can be detained, forced into a car, or treated as if they've committed a crime if an adult appears coherent, isn't presenting an immediate danger in a way authorities can act on, and doesn't meet the legal threshold for intervention. The options can be limited. And that's one of the most frustrating realities in the case like this. From the family's view, something may be deeply wrong. From a legal view, an adult may still have the right to keep traveling, even if their choices seem strange, concerning, or completely out of character. That tension sits right in the middle of Bryce's disappearance. Because after all the concern, after all the delay, after all the calls and checks, Bryce was still out there. He was still moving, and he still wasn't home. Eventually, he left the Buttonwillow area and continued south. By then, it was late. The road ahead would take him farther down I-5 toward the mountains and canyons north of Los Angeles, toward Castaic. In the early morning hours of August 30th, Bryce called his mother. Reports placed this call around 2 a.m. He indicated that he was tired and was going to pull over or rest before continuing. And that detail is devastating in hindsight, because it sounds ordinary. A tired driver stopping to sleep isn't strange by itself. I've done it. In fact, it can be the safest decision. Anyone who's driven a long stretch of highway at night knows that moment when your eyes get heavy and you realize pushing farther might be a bad idea. But in this case, that call became part of the final known stretch. Bryce was still alive. He was still speaking with family. He was still somewhere between where he had been and where he was supposed to be. And then the calls ended. For his parents, the next expected moment was simple. He would arrive, maybe later than planned, maybe after a stressful night, maybe with explanations that didn't fully make sense, but he would be there. And the fear would finally have somewhere to land. Instead, officers came to the door. Bryce's Toyota Highlander had been found near Castaic Lake. The vehicle was damaged, and Bryce was gone. Castaic Lake sits in northern Los Angeles County, near rugged terrain, roads, water, slopes, and open areas that can be difficult to search completely. According to reports at the time, Bryce's 2003 Toyota Highlander was found on its side around 5:30 in the morning on August 30th near the lake's main ramp area. Other reports describe the vehicle as being down an embankment or off Lake Hughes Road in the Castaic Lake area. Inside the SUV, investigators found belongings connected to Bryce, his phone, wallet, and laptop. Those items are important because they complicate the idea of a clean, voluntary disappearance. Could someone leave without them? Yeah. It happens, especially if someone is panicked, injured, disoriented, or making an impulsive choice. But leaving behind a phone and wallet also means that if Bryce walked away from that vehicle, he may have done so without the basic tools most people rely on to get help, move around, or start over. There were reports that the rear window of the SUV had been broken or removed, and that Bryce may have exited through the back. There was also reportedly blood in the vehicle, but public reporting has not established that Bryce suffered a fatal injury at the scene. So the central question remained wide open. Did Bryce walk away injured? Did he enter the surrounding terrain? Did he reach the water? Did someone pick him up? Did he choose to disappear? Or did something happen after he survived the crash? The vehicle answered one question. It showed where the drive ended, but it didn't show where Bryce went. And once searchers arrived, that missing space around the SUV became the focus of the case. After the SUV was found, the search focused on the Castaic Lake area. Search teams looked by land and water. Reports described divers searching the lake, bloodhounds being used, and volunteers helping day and night. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, local searchers, and Bryce's family were all part of the effort to find any sign of him. But the search did not produce Bryce. And that matters because the area around Castaic Lake is not a small indoor scene where every inch can be sealed, searched, and cleared with total confidence. It's a large outdoor environment with roads, slopes, brush, water, and places where a person could be missed even during a serious search. At the same time, the lack of evidence cuts both ways. If Bryce entered the lake, why wasn't he found? If he walked into the surrounding area injured, why was there no clear trail? If he left voluntarily, how did he move forward without the items left inside the SUV? Every possibility creates another problem, and that's why this case has remained so haunting. Not because there are no theories, there are plenty, but because every theory has something that doesn't fit comfortably. Then, just days later, the search area produced another discovery that briefly made the case feel even darker. In September 2013, a burned body was found near the Castaic Lake area. Because it was found close enough to the area connected to Bryce's disappearance, it immediately raised fear and speculation. For the family, already searching, already waiting, and already living inside uncertainty, that kind of discovery is almost impossible to imagine. It could be an answer. It could be the worst possible answer. And for a short time, the possibility hung over the case. But authorities later confirmed that the body was not Bryce Laspisa. ABC7 reported that the remains were identified as Lamondre Dion Miles, a 33-year-old man from South Los Angeles, and investigators said his death was unrelated to Bryce's disappearance. So that lead closed, but it didn't bring Bryce home. It only added another painful chapter to an already difficult search. The area had produced a body, just not the person everyone was looking for. And with that lead ruled out, the case turned to the same unresolved question it started with. If Bryce wasn't in the SUV and he wasn't found in the immediate search, where did he go? And just a quick sidebar here. It's important not to just say his name, mention the terrible way he was found, and then move on like his life only mattered because he briefly overlapped with another investigation. According to Hawthorne police, arrests were made within days. Joanna Amezcua and Luis Amezcua were charged with murder, and Javier Vega was charged with accessory to murder and arson. Investigators believed Miles had been killed over a money dispute before his body was taken to the Castaic area. So that lead did close, but it closed because Lamondre Miles was identified, his death was investigated as its own homicide, and charges were filed in his case. There are several major theories in Bryce Laspisa's disappearance, and each one has to be handled honestly. The first is that Bryce walked away voluntarily. He was legally an adult. Some later discussion around the case raised the possibility that if he chose to leave his life behind, he had the legal right to be unavailable. That idea is painful for families, but it is legally real. Still, the theory has problems. He left behind his phone, wallet, laptop, and vehicle. Starting over without those things would be extremely difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. The second theory is that Bryce was in some kind of crisis and left the vehicle in a confused or impulsive state. This theory is often discussed because of the strange behavior reported before the disappearance, the long delay in Buttonwillow, and the final crash. But again, we have to be careful. We can't diagnose Bryce. We can't state what he intended. We can only say that the people around him were concerned and that his actions were unusual. The third theory is accident or exposure. If Bryce survived the crash, climbed out, and wandered into the surrounding area, he could have become lost, injured, dehydrated, or disoriented. Terrain, darkness, and water all make that possible. But again, the problem is the lack of remains or a clear trail. The fourth theory is foul play. Could someone have encountered Bryce after the crash? Could he have accepted a ride? Could something have happened away from the SUV? Based on public information, it can't be completely ruled out, but there's also no publicly confirmed evidence that a specific person harmed him. And that's the challenge. A theory can be possible without being proven. In Bryce's case, possibility isn't enough to close the story. It only shows how many directions the case can go when the final confirmed point is a damaged SUV, an empty driver's seat, and belongings left behind. So here's what can be said with confidence. Bryce was 19 years old. He was last seen in the Castaic area on August 30th, 2013. He had been driving south through California toward his parents' home before he vanished. There were concerns about his behavior as a long, unusual delay in the Buttonwillow area. His Toyota Highlander was later found damaged near Castaic Lake. His personal belongings were found inside. Searches were conducted in the area, including water searches. A burned body found nearby was later confirmed not to be Bryce, and Bryce Laspisa remains missing. Those are the facts. Everything beyond that has to be treated carefully, because this case isn't a puzzle for entertainment. It's a real family's ongoing loss, and the difference matters. Speculation can be useful when it's clearly labeled, but it can also bury the truth under a story that sounds better than the evidence actually allows. So the most honest version of Bryce's case doesn't end with a dramatic answer. It ends with the same uncomfortable reality investigators and his family have been facing since 2013. The road is known, the vehicle is known, the final location is known, but what happened after Bryce got out of the SUV is still unknown. The hardest part of Bryce's disappearance is not just that he vanished. It's how close the story came to ending differently. He was on the phone. He was seen. He was checked on. He was expected home. At so many points, the timeline feels like it could turn toward relief. A gas stop becomes a delay. Maybe he'll leave soon. A welfare check happens, but maybe he'll continue after that. A late night call says he's tired, but maybe he'll sleep and wake up. A vehicle is found, but maybe he's nearby. Every step offers a thin possibility that the next update will be the one that brings him home, and every time that relief disappears. By sunrise on August 30th, 2013, the road had ended at Castaic Lake. The SUV was there, Bryce's belongings were there, but Bryce was not. And more than a decade later, that is still where the case sits. Somewhere between a road trip, a crash, a search, and a question no one has been able to answer. What happened after Bryce Laspisa got out of that vehicle? Until that question is answered, his case remains open in the only way that matters. Not as a legend, not as an internet mystery, but as a missing son, a missing friend, and a young man whose final known hours still deserve to be understood with care. Because for Bryce's family, the story didn't end at Castaic Lake. It began there, and they're still waiting for the rest of it. I talked to my mother about this case and the case that I covered previously, Brandon Swanson, about missing a child. Having a child go missing is incredibly difficult on the parents. I literally cannot fathom or even come close to imagining the amount of pain that a parent would go through losing a child. I don't have any children of my own. But in talking with my mother, we discussed how much more difficult it must be when you have contact with your child and they go missing while you're contacting them. In Brandon Swanson's case, he was literally on the phone with his parents and said, "Oh shit," and then that was it. In this case, if I remember correctly, it was like over the span of 30 hours of this whole thing, of conversation and going back and forth, which should have been a 7-hour drive about. I've driven that area. I've driven through the Grapevine. I've gone from Fresno to LA, and I've gone up to Sacramento, and all these. I've driven the whole area. I know the area pretty well. And to sit there and think that he disappeared in this time while contacting me, I cannot imagine the pain his family feels. So to his parents, my condolences to you and your loss and your family.